Hi everyone, I'm Mike CJ from Lanzarote Information and welcome to another informational video about the island of Lanzarote. And this week we are going to be talking about the Timanfaya eruptions which took place between 1730 and 1736. Now wait a moment, because many of you will know the story of the eruptions quite well. Maybe you've done the bus tour of Timanfaya and found out a lot more about them firsthand. But there is so much that isn't out there in the public domain and hasn't been talked about, because it's over the years has been condensed down to basically a short tourist story. What you're going to get today is the full story, and I absolutely am happy to wager that there are things I will tell you today that you didn't know before, so stay tuned until the end. And it really is the most extraordinary story. So let's wind the clock back first of all to 1730, before the eruptions started, and I'll give you a description of what Lanzarote was like then, or certainly that area of Lanzarote. Where the mountains are, the fire mountains, Timanfaya, that was all a flat plain that ran all the way down to what we now know as Salinas de Janubio, Playa Blanca end, and it was this lovely fertile flat plain. And there were 11 villages there with about 420 houses, and the area was the most fertile on the island. And it was basically the area of the island that grew all the food that islanders needed. So there were fields of grain, there were melons being grown, there were tomatoes, potatoes, onions, all the things that people need for regular sustenance, to make bread and eat fruit and all those kinds of things. That was all happening in the area we now know as Timanfaya. And as I said, there were 11 villages there, and the villagers tended the crops, and they also had herds of cows for milk and beef, and they had large herds of goats as well. So that's what it looked like then. Now, right at the end, where we now have the salt pans of Salinas de Janubio, there was a lovely port, a harbour area that was used by shipping both between Lanzarote and other islands, and also as a main shipping port for ships travelling between the Americas and Europe. That was known as Puerto Real. So that's what the area looked like until the fateful day on the 1st of September 1730. And it was when everything changed for Lanzarote. Now, before I tell you more, I want you to pause for a minute and just think about this. We all know the eruptions lasted for 6 years. But in our heads, and from watching films and thinking about Pompeii, for example, volcanic eruptions are explosive things that happen, in a matter of hours or perhaps 2 or 3 days. Can you imagine that these eruptions were taking place for a period of 6 years? So for 6 years, the island was covered in volcanic smoke. The whole island was dark. There was ash being thrown up into the air and falling all around Lanzarote. There were volcanic bombs, huge rocks being sent up by some of these cones. In the end, there were 30 cones created, so 30 mountains that didn't exist before and on what was a flat plain. But there's one upside to all of this, and that's that the type of lava flow we have in Lanzarote and in the Canary Islands in general, and also in Hawaii, is a very slow flowing lava. So actually nobody was killed by the lava flows from Timanfaya, because it flowed at a sort of walking pace, or slightly less than a walking pace. So you could comfortably outrun it if you needed to, and many people needed to. But let's go back to September the 1st, when the first eruption happened. And we're lucky in many ways because we have a first-person account. The priest of Yaitsa actually recorded a lot of the stuff that happened over the 6 years from September the 1st, 1730. His name was Andres Lorenzo Curbelo, And I'm going to read from my iPad his actual words, just a few bits of it. Now, some of you may have heard this before if you've been on the Timanfaya tour. Unfortunately, it's read by a sort of fairly drony voice on the buses, and it's quite hard to distinguish some of the things that are being said. So I'll try and read it with a bit more life and vigour, and hopefully with a bit more clarity for you. But I'll just pick out a few selected bits to give you a flavour of what he saw, what the people of Lanzarote at the time felt. So he starts with, on September the 1st between 9 and 10 at night, the earth suddenly opened up near Timanfaya, 2 leagues from Yaisa. Now Timanfaya, by the way, is the name of one of the 11 villages that were buried by the lava flow. On the first night, an enormous mountain rose from the earth's core and flames escaped from its apex, which continued to burn for 19 days. A few days later, a new abyss formed, and a torrent of lava flowed from Timanfaya over Rodeo and over part of Mancha Blanca. The lava spread over places to the north, at first as fast as water, but soon the speed slowed down, and it flowed like honey. And on September the 7th, so we're only a week into this now, a considerable rock rose from the earth's bosom with a noise like thunder, and by its pressure forced the lava, which had been heading north, to change course and head towards the northwest and west-northwest. The mass of lava arrived and destroyed in an instant the places of Maretas and Santa Catalina located in the valley. So we're hearing names of villages we don't know. I mean, they're not part of the Lanzarote story, but Santa Catalina, Maretas, and before we had a place called Rodeo. He goes on. On September the 11th, the eruption was renewed with greater force, and the lava began to flow once again. From Santa Catalina, it fell on Mazo. It set fire to and covered the whole village, and it continued its course to the sea, flowing for 6 days with a frightful noise and forming waterfalls. A great quantity of dead fish swam on the surface of the sea, coming to die on the shore. Very soon everything calmed down, and the eruption seemed to have ceased completely. And there's more from Andres. On October the 18th, 3 new openings formed immediately above Santa Catalina, which are still burning from their holes, and there are escaping masses of thick smoke that spread over the entire island, accompanied by a large quantity of slag, sand and ashes that are spread all around. Drops of water are seen falling from all points in the form of dirty rain. The thunder and explosions that accompanied these phenomena, the darkness produced by the mass of ashes, and the smoke that covers the island forced the inhabitants of Yaisa to flee more than once, returning very quickly because these detonations did not seem to be accompanied by any other phenomenon of devastation. So let's move on now to January the 7th, 1731, and this is Andres' entry in his account, his diary. New eruptions came to upset all the previous ones. Incandescent streams accompanied by very thick smoke came out of the openings that had formed in the mountain. The clouds of smoke were crossed by brilliant flashes of blue and red light, followed by violent thunderclaps, as in storms. And this spectacle was frightening, as it was new to the inhabitants who did not know the storms in this region. On the 10th of January, an immense mountain was seen to rise, which on the same day sank into its own crater with a frightful noise and covered the island with ashes and stones. The streams of burning lava descended like streams to the sea through the bad country, the Malpais. On the 27th of January, this particular eruption ended. Now, Andres' account goes on, and for example, on the 3rd of January, there were 3 new cones that erupted. On the 13th of April, 2 more mountains appeared with a frightful noise. And on the 21st of May, the volcanic fire seemed to be extinguished, but it was renewed on the 6th, a quarter of a league further away, with yet another new hill arising. So I'm not going to read everything that Andres wrote, but it gives a very good first-person account of what actually happened, and you can find it online. What it's worth doing now is examining where we are after these 6 years of eruptions, what's happened and how the island has changed in that time. But before we do that, we should talk about the effect on the existing inhabitants of Lanzarote, which their lives changed almost irrevocably after the 1st of September 1730, because their major area of food source became impassable and covered with ash and lava. And it actually led to a mass emigration from the island because there simply was not enough food to go around. And the people jumped onto ships going to Cuba and the Americas, and whole families moved over to the other side of the world, boarding the ships that docked in Arrecife to take on wood and water and the things they needed for their Atlantic crossing. And so many of those families now are their descendants are in San Antonio in Texas, in Cuba, in the Dominican Republic, and in South America as well. And with the fall in population, the remaining islanders, and there weren't that many left, were able to grow enough food to sustain themselves in the other more fertile parts of the island, the north, Aria, Punta Mujeres, Orsula, and places like that. So these 6 years of eruptions produced 30 new cones, and that's that whole line of cones in and around Timanfaya, which kind of run across that section of the island. So let's talk about how the island looked. And remember, we were originally in a fertile plain with 11 villages. All 11 villages were engulfed. They are now, if you drive on that road through Timanfaya and look to the left and right where the fields of lava are, those 11 villages are down there underneath all of that. The area covered by ash and lava was about 25% of the island, so 50 and more square kilometers were covered with lava, which became known as the Mal País, the Badlands. Because if you're driving on that road and you look at the lava, it's almost impossible to traverse it on foot because it's so rough and so sort of spiky and difficult to walk along. So it was known as the Badlands. And that extended all the way down to Salinas de Janubio. And where the lava met the sea, it solidified, and it actually increased the size of Lanzarote by creating more land on the edges of the coasts from the lava. The increase in the size of Lanzarote was about 7%. Now, I've mentioned that port before, Puerto Real, which was the port where we now have Salinas de Janubio. And the lava actually completely enclosed that port, so it was no longer accessible to shipping. Basically, a new piece of land was created that turned it from a harbour into a lagoon. So the port was gone. It was never used again as a port that vessels could visit. And it was at that time that that area was turned into a salt pan to create something of use, because the lagoon, although not accessible to the sea, was still filled by the sea and still had a tidal action in it. And the whole area for a period became completely inaccessible. And if you look at the lava, it's very rough, very difficult to walk on, to move around. It took hundreds of people with camels to gradually clear the rocks to create paths that people could walk on to get back down to the south of the island. So what's the legacy of these incredible 6-year-long eruptions? Well, there are a few. The fact that so many Lanzaroteños ended up in the Americas are part of the legacy of that. Another legacy is the advent of vine growing to make wine on the island. And we talked about the fertility of the area. The problem after the eruptions was that the vast majority of the decent soil was way too far down in order to be able to grow anything going forward. But it was discovered that in the area of La Heria, the Picon, the Rofe, the volcanic ash that had fallen, wasn't as deep as it was in many areas, and you could actually, by digging down 1 or 2 meters in many places, actually get down to that fertile soil. And it was decided at the time that they would dig holes, hoyos, and create zocos, walls to protect the vines, down into the soil, plant vines in them, and then pull back the volcanic ash to give them some protection and draw some moisture in from the air. And that was really, really successful. And it wasn't long afterwards that wine growing started on the island, and is something we have as a wonderful legacy today. And the other legacy, of course, is that it has created one of the wonders of the world. I mean, Timanfaya is just a stunningly beautiful place to look at. And just to drive through it on that beautiful, smooth tarmac, to see the mountains and the way their colours change according to where the sun is and where the light is coming from, is an incredible experience, and one that millions and millions of people have enjoyed over the years. And the other legacy is the heat in the soil. And it's incredible to think that 300 odd years after the eruptions finished, the temperature in the soil at 13 meters down can be up to 600 degrees centigrade. So that's just that energy, that heat is just stored in the ground there. And it's why we have the natural barbecue that was built in that area during Cesar Manrique's time, that enables them to cook chicken and whatever else they want to do on a barbecue, purely working on the residual heat coming up from those volcanic eruptions. So there you go, that's the story of Timanfaya. Now, I started this off by saying that I would tell you some things you didn't know. I'd love to hear what they were, so please put a comment in below and let me know what surprised you in what I've been saying, what we've covered during this video. Equally, if you knew it all anyway, let me know, and I apologise for misleading you at the start of this. Now, if you're the kind of person who's enjoyed this video and found it interesting and fascinating, I think you will really enjoy our weekly newsletter. So have a look at the link in the description below and try our newsletter and see what you think of it, and see if it's up your street. Thanks so much for watching. I really hope you've enjoyed it. If you have, give us a like. If you haven't, let me know what we need to change. Bye for now, everybody. Bye.